Welcome back to Outside View Scandals. Today we're delving into the dramatic and scandalous life of one of the greatest poets in history, Dante Alighieri. But this isn't about the Divine Comedy or his epic journey through hell, purgatory, and paradise. No, this is about a very real and earthly hell that Dante himself endured, his exile from Florence in 1302. Because sometimes life is stranger and more scandalous than fiction. To understand Dante's exile, we first need to understand the chaotic political landscape of medieval Florence. In the late 13th and early 14th centuries, Florence was a city divided. On one side, you had the Guelphs, who supported the Pope and his influence over Italian politics. On the other side, you had the Ghibellines, who backed the Holy Roman Emperor as a counterbalance to papal power. Sounds straightforward, right? Well, yeah, not exactly. Because even within the victorious Guelph faction, there was a bitter rivalry between two subgroups, the White Guelphs and the Black Guelphs. And as fate would have it, Dante was caught right in the middle of this mess. Dante was a White Guelph, a faction that favored a more independent Florence, free from the overreach of the Pope. The Black Guelphs, on the other hand, were staunchly pro-papal and sought to align Florence more closely with Rome. And this rivalry wasn't just a war of words. It was a brutal and often violent struggle for power. And as you might have guessed, Dante's faction wasn't the one to come out on top. In 1301, Pope Boniface VIII decided he had enough of Florence's rebellious streak. He invited Charles of Valois, a French prince, to march into the city under the guise of restoring peace. What Charles actually did was help the Black Guelphs seize control of Florence, leading to widespread purges of their rivals. Dante, who was serving as a city official at the time, was out of town on a diplomatic mission. And while he was away, his world fell apart. In January 1302, Dante was charged with corruption, financial mismanagement, and opposing the Pope, all trumped-up accusations concocted by his political enemies. He was sentenced to exile, fined a hefty sum, and threatened with execution if he ever returned to Florence. In a single stroke, Dante lost his home, his position, and his place in Florentine society. So let's pause here to appreciate the irony. Dante, the man who would go on to write one of the greatest works of literature in human history, was essentially cancelled by his hometown. Imagine exiling Shakespeare from Stratford or banishing Tolstoy from Russia. That's the level of absurdity we're dealing with. But Dante's exile wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a symptom of a deeply corrupt and divided political system. Florence, like much of medieval Italy, was a city where loyalty was fluid, alliances were temporary, and betrayal was just another tool of governance. Dante himself had been part of this system, serving in public office and navigating the treacherous waters of Florentine politics. In a way, his exile was both his downfall and his liberation. Forced to wander from city to city, Dante spent the rest of his life as a political exile. He sought refuge in places like Verona, Bologna, and Ravenna, relying on the hospitality of patrons and the goodwill of other courts. But he never stopped longing for Florence. His poetry is filled with references to his lost homeland, often tinged with bitterness and regret. And yet, it was during this period of exile that Dante wrote the Divine Comedy. Imagine that, being kicked out of your city and deciding to channel your frustration into a literary masterpiece that would outlive everyone who wronged you. If that's not poetic justice, I don't know what is. Dante didn't pull any punches in his writing. He used the Divine Comedy to settle scores, placing many of his enemies in hell for their sins. Pope Boniface VIII, Charles of Valois, and numerous Florentine officials all make appearances in his infernal vision. It's the ultimate burn book only instead of high school drama, it's eternal damnation. But Dante's exile wasn't just about revenge. It was also a period of profound intellectual growth. Freed from the constraints of Florentine politics, he immersed himself in philosophy, theology, and the classics. He expanded his worldview, incorporating ideas from ancient Greece and Rome, as well as contemporary scholars. The result was a work that transcended its time and place, speaking to universal themes of love, justice, and redemption. Despite his achievements, Dante never stopped hoping for a return to Florence. He petitioned the city repeatedly, but the conditions for his return were almost always humiliating. At one point, he was offered the chance to come back if he admitted guilt and paid a fine. Dante, ever the proud and stubborn poet, refused. "If I cannot return with honor," he wrote, "I will not return at all." Dante died in exile in 1321 in Ravenna, far from the city he loved and despised in equal measure. It wasn't until centuries later that Florence finally recognized his genius. Today, statues of Dante stand proudly in Florence, and his works are celebrated as some of the greatest achievements in world literature. The city even issued a formal apology, about 700 years too late. So what can we learn from the exile of Dante Alighieri? First, that political rivalries and corruption have been around for a very long time. Second, that sometimes being kicked out of your comfort zone can lead to extraordinary things. And finally, that revenge is best served in iambic tercets. So thank you for tuning into Outside View Scandals, where we explore the stories that shaped history and remind us that even the greatest figures weren't immune to the messiness of life. And remember, the next time someone tells you to let go of a grudge, just say, "If Dante didn't, why should I?" Until next time, and the next video is right here in the end screen.